Hi everyone. We are in 1906 in our diary time machine, and this is the second part of the very long diary entry of the 8th of April, which was a Saturday. And Dmitri has promised us that he is going to describe every day of the Easter holiday, and I'm still a bit confused about that, but I'm beginning to think so. In the previous diary entry, I mentioned that it was odd that he talked about going to Orthros or Matins on that Saturday, because really the only time you have Orthros uh, is when you're at night, or in the evening is when you're going to have a liturgy at night. And really the only time that happens is on Easter or Pascha. In the Orthodox Church, you don't do that for Christmas. You don't have a night service for Christmas. I think they have a midnight mass in the Roman Catholic Church, if I'm not mistaken. But in Orthodoxy, on that is on Pascha, and so you start out with Orthros from 11 o'clock until midnight, and then you have the Paschal liturgy, and that usually goes from midnight to, it could be up to 2 in the morning or beyond. And then the tradition after that is to go and break the fast and have a little feast, a little late night feast. And in a lot of instances, people don't stay for the liturgy, and I can't say I necessarily blame them. I try to, but boy, that makes it a very long night, since you begin with Orthros, and Dmitri even said that Orthros went for 2 hours or more, and then you have the 2 hour liturgy at least, and not everybody has the stamina for that. And there's also another motivation, which is to go to Orthros, which concludes with the beautiful, all the candles are blown out, all the lights are turned off in the church, and then the 10 young women come out with lit candles, and they light the candles of the parishioners, of the people who are there in attendance, and the parishioners in turn light the candles of the people standing next to them. And it's really beautiful. And then the resurrection is proclaimed, and everybody exchanges Paschal greetings, which is one of the big topics today, because the Paschal greetings involve kissing on each cheek, and 3 times in the Russian tradition. I can never remember. In France, for instance, I'm pretty sure it's 2, just as a greeting in general, not as an Easter greeting. But anyway, in the Orthodox Church, it's 3, and I guess, so Maria was turning 16, Dmitri was 14, so they were old enough to do the whole service. And it must have been a little hard for them, because they got up relatively early. But yeah, I guess in general at my church, it seems like children start coming when they're between 8 and 11. Maybe parents consider it on the basis of the individual child. I have seen younger children, but they don't tend to do very well. They tend to fall asleep. Okay, anyway, I also want to say that the new names that are mentioned in this diary entry are names of officers of the 2nd Battalion, so Dimitri's Guards Rifle Battalion. And so we have the names Gadan and Del Sal, and I don't have any further information about them. And once again, we have an Olga who is mentioned, without any way of knowing whether this was the Tsar's younger sister Olga, or if it was Olga Nikolaevna, the Tsar's daughter, who was 10, or if indeed it was actually some other Olga. All right, so I've already talked 5 minutes, so let's dig in. After liturgy, we went with Aunt, she was there this time, to break the fast at the Alexander Palace. How pleasant it was to eat butter and drink milk after the huge 7-day fast, ha ha ha. Long before Pascha, GM had already had a conversation about whether I should exchange the Paschal greeting with the representatives of the 2nd Battalion or not. When I mentioned that to the sovereign, he said I was too little, which I'm sure Aunt had whispered to him. And GM sent word to Del Sal, who had asked about it, to let him know that I would not be doing it. But when Aunt arrived, GM talked about it with her, and she told the sovereign what he had said, and in the end, he allowed it. So that's what happens when GM intervenes. On the first day of Pascha, I exchanged the greeting with them. The first day wasn't much fun. It seems like we rode, but I don't remember, so I can't describe it. On the second day of Pascha, we didn't do anything in particular. Same thing on the third. But on the fifth day, we, all the Empress's little children, and the two of us, went to Pavlovsk, and there was a conversation about what to do on April 6th. Aunt suggested hunting for gifts like they do on Pascha, but that was such a disgusting idea that Maria protested, and there ended up being a magician and even two, which was great fun. And then we played little games, which was more boring. Gadan, Del Sal, and Olga, she only brought 4, each brought 2 officers. So she only brought 4 as in parentheses. Okay, so I should have said at the beginning, I intended to, that it's a bit confusing because there are 2 aunts, and Dmitri doesn't use their names in either instance, but it's pretty clear which is which. So mainly it's Aunt Ella. So there's a couple of mentions of Aunt Ella, and there's a couple of mentions of Aunt Alex. And like I said, I think it's pretty clear, but I will clarify that. So it seems like, so this time Aunt Ella had come. I guess she hadn't been there more recently, but she had come. Or if she had been there, she hadn't been attending the Holy Week services with them. But this time for the Paschal service, she came. And so she went with Dmitri and Maria to the Alexander Palace, and it was grand to break the fast and have butter and milk. And boy, that is true. The one nice thing about fasting is how great it is when you get to break the fast and you feel proud of yourself for having kept it, and then you have the big payoff. And so Dmitri fasted for Holy Week, because technically you're supposed to do this throughout Lent, but he mentions the 7-day fast, so he did this during Holy Week. And that's pretty typical of people who aren't sort of real zealots or on a particular spiritual path. And then he says, ha ha ha, I don't know what that's about. He spells it H-A exclamation point, H-A exclamation point, and then a third time, and it's the same in Russian. And okay, I guess that's just his delight at having been able to eat butter and drink milk. So I guess he was like me in that respect. It's the dairy that he really missed while he was fasting. So then there was this whole issue of exchanging the Paschal greeting with the officers of his battalion. And I'm not sure how many officers that would have been. I would think at least 5 or 6. And it would be something that he was used to doing, at any rate, exchanging the Paschal greeting, but this time with officers and not just with members of the family. And for some reason, you would think that a child of 6 could do that, but for some reason there was this idea that he was too little to do that, and Dmitri was sure that Aunt Alex was behind that idea that he was too little to do it, that she had whispered it in the Tsar's ear. But then Aunt Ella, GM, I don't know if GM had talked directly to the emperor or not, because Dmitri says that he had mentioned it to the emperor, and apparently Del Sal had asked about it, and GM sent word to him that it wasn't going to be allowed. But then when Aunt Ella turns up, GM takes her aside and has a talk with her about it. And it works because she goes to the emperor and she convinces him. And Dmitri, very pleased, says this is what happens when GM intervenes. So, I've been talking about him growing up in the sense, certainly, of being allowed to play a more formal role in the ceremonial activities of the imperial family. And as you know, he was prevented from doing so by Alexandra, or at least he blamed Alexandra. And maybe this was something, maybe she had stepped in and said no because she genuinely thought, based on his own behavior, that he was not mature enough. But I think it makes a difference when he is allowed to do these things. I think it really helps him to gain some maturity and to take things more seriously. We'll see as the diaries continue on. But it's interesting that Laiming and Aunt Ella both step in and take his part. And maybe it's their sense as well that if he's given a little more responsibility, he'll have a chance to rise to the occasion, and he will rise to the occasion, or at least they should try it out. So that raises the question for me of what Alex's motivation has been all along. And I don't doubt for 1 minute that she was right to be worried about how Dmitri would behave, for instance, at these regimental dinners. As far as the behavior that we've seen in those diary entries, it does seem like it would have been a little bit of a risk. But I actually am wondering, and had thought about this before I got access to the 1906 and 1907 diaries when he was still a boy. I had wondered if there was some, I'm trying to think of the right word, it's not easy. If there was some unhappiness or displeasure on Alex's part, on the Empress's part, with the growing closeness between Dmitri and Nicholas. And it surely was nice for Nicholas to have a boy of this age. His own son was not only still a baby, but also had what was at that time usually a terminal illness. And if a child had hemophilia, you would assume that he would die either in childhood or in adolescence, if he was very lucky in young adulthood. And it was not only that, but Nicholas would never be able to do strenuous things with his son. He would never be able to roughhouse with him or, anything like that. And so maybe, everybody knows how devoted, how almost obsessed Alexandra was with her son, and with her son being the heir to the throne. And so I do wonder if she was a little uneasy watching Dmitri's relationship with the emperor grow and seeing the bond grow between them. And, I don't know. He was able to joke around with her, and they even seemed to have, I think I mentioned it before, kind of a connection with each other. But on the other hand, she was known to be a jealous woman, and she was known to be a woman who was distinctly uncomfortable when any of the Russian relations, any of the members of the imperial family kind of were included. beyond what she thought they should be. And Dmitri was getting older, he wasn't a little boy anymore. And he was charming, and as a young man, he would be popular with the public. And, it was silly for her to have worried about that, because Alexei was always going to be his father's son and the heir to the throne. But yeah, she maybe was a little uncomfortable with Dmitri's role as one of the most popular Grand Dukes with the public, and as Nicholas's pal and surrogate son. So, maybe we'll have occasion to return to that topic as the diaries go on, and certainly in the later diaries. But for the moment, Nicholas is open to listening to what Laiming has to say and what Ella has to say. And Ella, of course, being Alexandra's sister. And yeah, he was open to it. And in this instance, if indeed Dmitri was correct in suspecting that Alex was the one who hadn't wanted him to be able to exchange Easter greetings with the officers of his battalion, she had to back down in that instance. Okay, so yeah, I really think he's talking about Bright Week, because he starts with the Pascha service, and I've never considered Bright Week to be the Easter holidays. I was an Orthodox Sunday school teacher for 10 years, so I should know these things, but I always just thought of Bright Week as a special week when you don't do any fasting, and you don't, there are other rules that are suspended. Okay. So anyway, it seems like that's what he's talking about, because he's talking about the activities they did on the first day, the second day, the third day, and then he skips to the fifth day. And obviously they're not fasting, they're going out and doing things, although it's not much fun, he says, except for on the fifth day. And then they all go off to Pavlovsk, where his cousins are, who are around the same age. And he says, the Empress's little children, on the fifth day, all the Empress's little children, and the two of us. So the two of us would be himself and Maria. I don't know if all the Empress's little children meant that Alexei was included, but certainly the girls. And then there's a conversation about what to do on April 6th. So there's a conversation about how to celebrate Maria's birthday. And this is an instance where I don't know which aunt he's talking about, whether it's Aunt Ella or Aunt Alex. Dmitri says all the Empress's little children went to Pavlovsk, but he doesn't say that the Empress went to Pavlovsk. But then he kind of phrases it strangely when Aunt suggests hunting for gifts like they do on Pascha. He doesn't say like we do on Pascha. So I wonder if that was a tradition that Alexandra and Nicholas did with their children. I don't know. I'm not Russian Orthodox. I'm Greek Orthodox, but in the Greek Orthodox Church in the U.S., so we have an Easter egg hunt for the kids at my church, but I don't know if that's actually a tradition that you have in the Orthodox Church in general, or if it wasn't maybe something that Alexandra had brought with her from England. But whatever it is, I'm sure that Maria and Dmitri both thought that, that was a little too young for them. That's fine for the four little girls, but they were teenagers. And so they didn't want to do that. So luckily they were listened to, and there was a magician, and even two, he says, and it was fun. And then we played these little games, I guess typical party games. I think of, pin the tail on the donkey, but I don't know if they did that in 1906 in Russia. And he wasn't as wild about those. And so these two officers, Gadan and Del Sal, had both come to Pavlovsk, and here we have the mention of Olga. And this whole last line confuses me, because he says Gadan, Del Sal, and Olga each brought 2 officers, and then in parentheses next to Olga he says she only brought 4, as though 4 wasn't very many. So who each brought 2? I don't know. Is he saying, it seems like he's saying that the officers, Gadan and Del Sal, each brought 2 officers, but that doesn't make any sense. They themselves were 2 officers. So maybe each of the girls had 2 officers, or each of all the children, I don't know. But the one thing that interests me about that is that I've wondered in the past with the diary entries, when Dmitri has expressed friendliness towards officers like they were people he knew and had made friends with, not even officers from his own battalion or from the Horse Guards, that, it does seem like, to a certain extent, the officers who were in the vicinity of the imperial family were included in some sort of day-to-day fun things that the family did. They were included, and so the children did get to know them. So, I hope there's more about that in future diary entries, and it's rather sweet. And sorry I went so long. We've got one more long and interesting paragraph of this diary entry, and then we will move on in April. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.